Welcome to this presentation of Weeding the School Library Collection. Today we're going to talk about weeding the school library collection, and my name is Paige Bradenkamp. I'm the school library consultant here at Wyoming State Library. Prior to coming to the state library, I was a teacher librarian for 8 years in schools in Nebraska and Wyoming. So I am familiar with how easy it is to put weeding off. It is extremely important to do for a collection, but it's also extremely easy to just let it slide. It's not always the priority, especially when you have classes, you're trying to put lessons together, you have teachers requiring information and help, and principals requiring you to do this, you have parents, students. It can be very overwhelming, and weeding often falls to the bottom of the list. So I'm hoping today that during this presentation you're going to find some things, some information that helps you with your own weeding task, and that maybe helps you get over some of the hurdles that can occur when we're faced with weeding the collection. During this presentation, we are going to look at these objectives, keeping in mind that there are a lot of resources out there that explain weeding and all that goes with it. I've tried to keep it simple, and the last slide contains some of those resources that you can look up on your own time, and there's also links to some of the resources I've used for this presentation. There will also be a link to the recording of this presentation, as well as a link to these slides, and you'll be able to find that on wyominglibraries.org, and that is the Wyoming State Library blog, and it's under School Library Resources. So today's objectives, we're going to look at what is weeding, and we're going to look at why it's important to weed, and who should do the weeding, and then the practical steps for actually weeding the collection. And something that for me was always an issue is time. When do you weed? And then we'll look at a few ways that you can take care of your weeded items, because it doesn't always mean just throwing them in the dumpster. And we'll start with just a couple of metaphors for weeding. Though weeding is often compared to gardening, I didn't want to focus on that too much, but it is a really easy metaphor, and it's something that a lot of us can relate to because we like to garden. But we also know that if we want a nice garden, we have to get in there and do the dirty work and dig out those weeds. Sometimes we plant beautiful flowers. Columbine is a lovely flower, but it can also be very invasive if it's not kept down. So even though we might have something that's very desirable, sometimes we just need to cull it back a little. We need to cut back. And sometimes something sneaks in that we didn't realize, maybe an invasive weed that blew in, dandelions blew in from the neighbors. Those are things that we also need to take out. But basically, it's about making the garden a nice place to be, a welcoming place, a beautiful place, and making it easy to enjoy. Another metaphor that I thought was appropriate is our closets. This week, as I was putting together the weeding webinar, one day I was looking through my closet trying to find something to wear, and I thought, oh my gosh, my closet needs to be weeded. And it hit me right then that there are so many appropriate metaphors, and weeding is really about getting rid of stuff that doesn't fit anymore, getting rid of stuff that doesn't look good, getting rid of stuff that maybe makes everything seem cluttered. You know, sometimes we just have to get rid of the older stuff because we can't find anything anymore. It's too cluttered. And that brings us to the library. A library, in the same way, when we don't weed, can become very cluttered. Some of us might have inherited a library where the past librarian didn't weed, and maybe it was a library that's been there since the 60s. You know, I worked in a school that had been built in the 60s, and there were a lot of items, a lot of books that were so old that I couldn't believe they were still on the shelf. But again, time can be a factor in weeding. But we need to get rid of those items so that we can make space for the new things. And when the library shelves get so cluttered that it becomes difficult to get a book in or out, students they're not going to want to look for books because it's too tough, it's too hard. A cluttered space is not a very welcoming space. We are in the business of making the library a very welcoming, vibrant hub where it's easy to access the information that you need. Otherwise, it's defeating the purpose of the library. We want kids to come in, we want teachers to come in, we want them to use the library. We need to make it welcoming and easy for them to do so. So we've talked about it a little bit, the challenges to weeding, and some of the reasons we don't weed are very simple. We don't have any time. There are so many responsibilities that a school librarian they have to do, that sometimes weeding just gets pushed to the bottom of the list. It also tends to be the least fun task. You know, it can be time consuming, but it's also taxing to our choices. It makes us question the things that we've purchased. It makes us question why it's on the shelf. Does it apply to the curriculum? Are students using it? So it can be a real wishy-washy kind of task. But it takes time to make those decisions. Another simple reason we don't is because there's no help. And it can be very overwhelming when we think we have to do it all by ourselves. And sometimes that is the case. As a solo librarian, you know, sometimes if you don't have an aide, you don't have the time to do that. And it's overwhelming to have to do it alone. Some more complicated reasons, the subjectivity of it. You know, sometimes we see a book or an item and we think, oh my gosh, that was such a good book. Well, maybe back in the day, but this is a different day. And if students today aren't picking that book up, even if we like it, we may have to say goodbye to it. Another thing that can be a little complicated is perceptions. Sometimes when people who don't understand the weeding process and managing a collection, sometimes they think, oh, well, you know, our tax money paid for those materials. Why are you throwing it out? Or maybe people think that you're censoring the library. Or maybe people think that you're just being wanton with the resources that the school provides. And that's not the case at all. It's just being a good steward of the library and managing the collection and making sure that the newest and most current and most reliable resources are available. So, what weeding is not. And here is a quote that I picked up from Crash Course in Weeding Library Collections by Francisca Goldsmith. Weeding is not an excuse for purging the collection of materials, ideas, aesthetics, or even technology with which you disagree. Deselection is a very different process from censorship. Deselection asks the questions, would I add this to the collection today? Censorship asks, how can I rid the collection of this item? And I like this quote because it draws a firm line between weeding and censorship, because weeding is not about censoring. It is not about getting rid of materials that are important but maybe we don't agree with. And that is one of the challenges of being a librarian, is that sometimes we don't agree with with an item that's on the shelf or in the collection, but because it offers a different point of view, it needs to stay. So there is a large amount of objectivity that we need to have as librarians, but we also need to know the reasons that we weed, and we need to be firm and be able to answer people when they ask, why are you throwing these things away? So what is weeding? Well, weeding, also known as deselection, is the maintenance part of the collection development cycle. And it is the systematic selecting of materials based on criteria and permanently removing them from the collection. To have a vibrant and living collection, we need to also get rid of some of the things that are no longer relevant to the collection. Here are some examples of books that the covers I pulled from Awful Library Books. I highly recommend that site. There's a lot of wonderful covers that'll give you a good laugh or make you think, oh my goodness, how did that ever get published? But the two ladies who have that site, they are also experts in weeding, and they have a lot of good tips, and it's just fun to look at that site. So we're looking at what makes me feel this way, and this is obviously an outdated book. Just by looking at the cover, not many students today are going to want to look at that. Just because of the cover, and covers draw kids in. A cover is very important. Not to mention, a lot of research has been done, and a lot more strategies have been developed for dealing with emotions. So this book is outdated on many levels. Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl. While this is still a very relevant book to many collections, it should probably be replaced. This book has seen much wear and probably won't last much longer, so it would be prudent to replace it. And then here, a testament to the subjectivity that can happen when weeding. I grew up on Sweet Valley High, and I have most of their series in a tub in my garage. So I could easily look at that and say, oh, but this was such a good series, we should keep it. Whereas today, a lot of kids won't pick this up based on the cover. Plus, there are so many different issues that kids deal with today. And even though these issues in Sweet Valley High might still be relevant, kids today, there's a lot more choices that they have, and they're going to want something that's a little more up to date. So why do we need to weed? What are the reasons that weeding is important? Weeding helps to keep the collection relevant to the community the library serves. And the school library serves the students, the teachers in the building and in the district. And so keeping it relevant means that we have materials relevant to the curriculum being used in the building and relevant to the levels for students reading, and relevant to their maturity levels, relevant to the professional reading that teachers do. Keeping the collection relevant to the community that library is serving, not necessarily the people out in the town, but the community that this school library serves. Weeding helps to reduce overcrowding, and that is important because if you can't find what you're looking for because things are tucked on top of each other and you have stacks of books sitting on top of the shelves or on the floor because there's no room, it's going to make it very difficult to find anything. And having shelves that are so crowded that it's difficult to get books in and out makes it also very difficult to use the collection. Weeding helps to make it easier for students and teachers to find what they're looking for. Weeding helps to make space for new items. Sometimes you have to get rid of one thing to get something new. And again, a living collection requires weeding. Weeding helps to ensure the library has current, accurate materials. When Pluto was no longer deemed a planet, all of those materials in the library had to be taken out. And that was a conscientious thing that every school librarian had to go in and do, had to find all of those materials that listed Pluto as the 9th planet and just take those out because that is no longer accurate to have those materials. And weeding also helps to keep the collection fresh and appealing. You don't want a soiled, dirty, stinky collection because nobody's going to want to use it. You want things to be fresh, to be new looking, to be crisp and clean and shiny. That is more welcoming. So who does the weeding? Well, the weeding is typically done by those working in the library. The certified school librarian or district librarian will usually have the final say to keep or weed, but assistants, library aides, paras can pull books for the librarian to look through. And this can be especially helpful if the school librarian manages libraries at more than one building. Sometimes a school library is not staffed by a certified school librarian, but a library staff, and that person can and will probably be responsible for that task. Basically, people who are aware of the criteria being used for weeding, aware of the curriculum, and aware of the needs of the teachers and students, those are the best people to do the weeding. This will also go back to the selection and deselection policy that your district should have in place. How do I weed? The first step is to consult that policy. If you don't know where that policy is, you need to talk to your principal and find out. A lot of times it's posted on the district webpage under policies. Sometimes it's a long policy, sometimes it's a brief paragraph of maybe 4 sentences. But it is extremely important to know what the district's selection and deselection policy is. If somebody has an issue with the weeding, then it's really important to have your district's policy at hand. Okay, and I see a question about copies of a book, and we will touch on that in just a little bit, Jacqueline. Another thing about weeding and the process of it is some library management systems like Follett, they offer a collection analysis option, and if you've done that, if you've uploaded your collection and allowed the collection analysis to happen, you can then look at a report and it will show age of your books. It will break it down into the Dewey Decimal areas by hundreds, even by tens. And it'll show you the average age of your collection, it will show you titles, it will show you duplicates, it will show you, again, the age. And you can look at that and just go through and figure out which items should be weeded. And that is one way to go about it. And it also makes it a little bit easier. Sometimes going book by book by book by book on the shelf is a little difficult. And this will allow you to target those really old science books or those really old technology books that have no business on the shelf anymore. So how do I weed? Continued. Number 3, several weeding methods have been developed, and choosing one is often difficult. And so most librarians do use a combination of methods, and one is the Crew method and one is Musti. And I'll talk about those in just a second. And also Heather Booth, in her article Weeding Blind, I have a link to it on the resources slide, she discusses the value of using more than one method. Her usual method was printing out a report on items that hadn't circulated using the library management system, and that's pretty much the only way she would weed until one day she was not able to access that report, and she decided to go through the stacks just looking at the things that jumped out at her, and she discovered other items that, though they had been circulating, they were also sticky, worn out, more than one copy, so she was able to weed that way as well. But again, looking at items and their circulation history is important as well, but not something that you should totally rely on, especially because I remember Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and we had a full shelf of those books, and they all needed to be replaced periodically because they got so much use. So even though their circulation was high, their covers and their condition were poor and needed to be replaced. Also, this is a caveat, and I want to touch on this briefly. Sometimes if something hasn't circulated in a while, it can be beneficial to promote the item. And sometimes just getting it out off the shelf, talking about it, doing a book talk with students, sometimes that will get circulation back up. Sometimes it just takes a little encouragement for an item to continue to be circulated. The Crew method, I wanted to talk on this because it is a method developed by Texas State Library, Jeanette Larson, and it is very handy, and that whole manual is available online. The Crew method is really more of a process. It's the continuous review, evaluation, and weeding of the collection. And I like to think that this is more of a structure that allows you to use the method of Musti. And here on this page, on this slide, this is a Crew formula, and this can be handy, but going through nonfiction, using the crew method, you look at how old the item is, you look at how many times it's been checked out, and then you use the method of Musti. And we'll come back to the slide in a minute. Let's see. Musti is an acronym, and all of those things, all of those letters mean something. It's a negative factor for a book. So M is the item misleading. Does it contain misleading information or out-of-date information? Is it ugly? The U is for ugly. Is it ugly? Is it soiled? Is it something that kids aren't even going to want to touch? Or is it something that is not, the illustrations are not relevant to today's world? The S is superseded. Is the information superseded? Is there a newer edition that can be purchased? The T is for trivial. Is it, does it really have no place in the collection? Is it of low quality? The I is for irrelevant. Is it irrelevant to the community or the curriculum? If it does not touch upon the curriculum or nobody is interested in reading it, it really shouldn't be in the library. And the E is for elsewhere. Can this information be found elsewhere more easily? And here we have a DVD of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Several of these letters apply. It could possibly contain misleading information depending on when this edition was published. If it still has Pluto on it, then that's misleading. Has it been superseded? Well, probably at this point, since information changes and encyclopedias are updated so often. This edition probably contains superseded. It's probably been superseded. And can the information on this DVD be found elsewhere? And yes, again, databases are really useful nowadays. And for those of you that are in Wyoming, we have gowild.net, where you can access Britannica online and get all of that information at your fingertips, continuously updated, and it's at no cost to you in school or at home with your library card. So your students, your teachers, you can access the encyclopedia without having to put the DVD into the drive, and you can access it anywhere, which is really handy. The Secret of the Ninth Planet, not really relevant illustrations. Besides that, the information is no longer going to be accurate because Pluto is not the ninth planet anymore. It is now a dwarf planet, so that information is outdated. And the Hunger Games, while that is still a relevant title, especially since the movies came out, I put that one on the slide because is it relevant to the community you serve? Is it something that your students can read? I had a K2 library. This is not something that I would have in the collection for a K2 school because the maturity level is way beyond them, the reading level is way beyond them. And though a lot of the second graders and even first graders were familiar with the Hunger Games, it is not something that I would keep on the shelf for them to read because it would not be relevant to their needs and their interests. And so that is something, if I found it on the shelf, I would pull that. But that, again, that is where your judgment and your expertise is important. You know your students, you know the community needs, and you know the curriculum, what should stay, what should go. I wanted to go back to this, the crew formula. These are just some general rules of thumb for different subjects in the Dewey system and different items that are on your shelf. This is a weeding checklist that I pulled from Less is More, a practical guide to weeding school library collections, and that is available here at the Wyoming State Library. But this is a simple checklist as well, especially if you don't have a lot of time. These are just some questions you can ask How often has it been used in the last 3 years? Is it in poor physical condition? And you can go down the list and determine from there if each of the items in your collection is something that should stay. The last two I would like you to take note of. Is it of local or regional interest? Kenneth Tomasima, his books often are on shelves in Wyoming school libraries because he was such a prolific and such an amazing author. They were amazing books, but because he basically local to Wyoming author, a lot of times those books it's a good idea to keep those. And is it an award winner or a classic? Sometimes it's tempting to want to keep every award-winning book in your collection, but this is where your judgment and expertise again comes in. It isn't necessary to keep every classic or every award winner, but again, your judgment, your expertise. When I was a school librarian, I had a challenge for my 3 through 5 grade students, and they could earn Scholastic Book Fair dollars if they read so many Newbery Medal winning books. And I got quite a few kids to bite because it is important, but unless you're using, or unless a teacher is using those award-winning books, one of the titles, maybe it doesn't have a place in your library any longer. Generally, a public library will keep all of those, and so those books can be found elsewhere. But also keeping in mind, school libraries tend to be fairly modest in size, and especially bringing in maker spaces and things like that, sometimes we're getting rid of shelf space, and so we need to be objective and we need to be critical about what stays on the shelves. So how do I weed? What are the procedures for weeding? And these procedures are things that library aides, library assistants, volunteers can help with. Once you've gotten the item removed from the shelf or the space that it's using, remove it from the catalog. You need to delete that entry. And then this is where volunteers and assistants can step in. You need to remove all of the library identification marks, like the barcodes, property stamps. You can cover those with black marker, and any other identifying marks. Take those off. And then you need to write discard, or if you have a discard stamp, you need to stamp that in a couple of places at least. I would do the title page, the inside front cover, the back cover. I've known librarians to stamp the sides of the book on the pages, but just so it's easy to see that that book has been discarded, because you don't want somebody coming in, oh, I found this library book, and trying to bring it back to you. Once you get it out of your collection, you want to be done with that, move on. So those are our procedures, and then from there you can do whatever you're going to do with it, whether it's recycle, upcycle. And so when do you weed? And this is based on your schedule. You can weed routinely for a set amount of time. Say you put aside Friday afternoons for weeding because maybe you don't have classes Friday afternoon, or maybe you do it during your Tuesday planning time because that's most convenient, or you can do it annually, which makes it a big task. And if you inventory, some people think that maybe that's the time to do it when you're doing inventory, but personally I think that just makes it an overwhelmingly huge task to do it when you're inventorying. But to do the weeding as well, sometimes it works out, and that's up to you to decide, but that can be done as well. And whenever there is a spare moment, not ideal unless you have a system, unless you've already determined, I'm going to go section by section, say I'll do the zeros, the Dewey zeros, and then you have a spare moment and you do that. But it's too easy to lose track of where you were, but again, it's up to you. Sometimes that's the only time a librarian gets to do it. But if you do it on a regular basis, it will not be overwhelming. And so some librarians do choose to do one section at a time. The benefit of that is that once you complete a section, you can feel like, wow, success. And so that can help keep your motivation. Some librarians do it shelf by shelf. And because time can be such a crunch if you do it shelf by shelf, and you do it whenever there's a spare moment, or you do it routinely, do this shelf today, get it done, then it can help you keep the schedule, help you stay organized, and not get overwhelmed. I know that sometimes a librarian will have an aide or an assistant or a para pull some books and then go through that, and then the librarian would go through it later, or the person in charge of the library would go through those later. Be careful with that, because I have done that, and when I had 2 buildings, and sometimes your assistant is so good that he or she will pull things and continue to pull things before you have a chance to get through all of them, and then the stacks pile up. I finally had to tell my aide to stop for a while until I could catch up. But again, it's whatever works best for you. The thing that's worse is not getting any weeding done. You know, and sometimes you can do a few books at a time, and that's better than nothing. You know, weeding is important, and sometimes a few at a time is all you can do with everything else that's going on around you. Now, there was a question, Jacqueline, I want to get back to your question about a librarian who had purchased 20 copies of a book. And sometimes that is appropriate. You know, sometimes a teacher has a book club or a class, it's a class set and it's a popular book, or it frankly just gets checked out that often. You know, maybe you have so many students that 20 copies is barely enough for a book that is extremely popular. But a lot of times then when the interest wanes, you have 20 copies sitting on a shelf. Harry Potter. How many copies were in my library, and that finally I had to go through and weed because it wasn't as popular any longer. And that's okay. You know, really look at your circ statistics. How often is it getting checked out? Can you do with half of that amount? And if you can do with only 10 copies, or if you can do with 5 copies, yeah, then the rest of them, get rid of them. It's okay to get rid of them. And that guilt, you know, sometimes we're getting rid of books and we wonder why. What if this all of a sudden is a hit again? Or what if all of a sudden the teacher needs a book about this again? Well, that could happen. It doesn't usually happen. And as the library manager, you need to make the decisions that are best for the library. And look at the circ statistics, look at what else is getting checked out. And it's okay to weed a lot of copies of one book because it's no longer needed. And shelf space is prime property in a school library. So it's okay, because then you can bring in new things that will again be popular. So what do you do with weeded items? You can have a book sale. You can sell those books to students, sell them for 10 cents, sell them for 25 cents. And that can go into a library activity fund, or you can use it to buy library supplies. That's up to you. You can recycle the books. You can recycle the items. You can upcycle. Maybe you have an art teacher that can use some of the books for art projects. You can do blackout poetry or use them for collages, but you can upcycle them, come up with other activities, challenge students to come up with something to do with some of the old books, you know, add them to your makerspace maybe. Donate to organizations. There's Operation Book, and there's several more listed on the resources page. Or you can donate to local organizations, the Wyoming State Library. There's a guide, and I linked to it on the resources page. The institutions throughout Wyoming often take books for, say, the juvenile detention centers, the nursing homes, and the other institutions, prisons, other institutions around Wyoming. You need to be careful about that though, because certain institutions, there will be a do not accept list of items that they don't accept for obvious reasons. And then just local organizations, maybe your local dentist office needs some books in the kids area. Sometimes you just throw them away, and sometimes they just need to be thrown away. Items that are too ragged, too disgusting, or the information is no longer accurate, sometimes those just need to be put in the dumpster. But you don't want to donate books that contain misinformation, because then that's not being a good steward of information. And because we don't want to disseminate misinformation, we don't want to propagate the wrong ideas. And by wrong, I mean not accurate. We don't want to talk about Pluto being a planet when it's not. To review, we talked about weeding, what it is and what it is not. We talked about the purposes of weeding, and we talk about who does those jobs, who does the weeding. And we talked about the steps for removing items from the collection. And we talked about time and finding the right time or not the right time. You know, what doesn't work for you. And then finding a place for your weeded items. And resources are here. And I want to highlight something. This is the, whoops, let's go back to that. Collection maintenance. Let me get my laser pointer here. Collection Maintenance, Section 4. This is a self-paced tutorial on the basics of weeding from the Idaho Commission for Libraries, and here's a link to it. That's a very valuable resource as well. And I recommend it if you have a little bit of time. It does take a little time. It's pretty thorough. And then there are some books that are available, some articles that you can read. And then over here are some organizations that accept donations, or they will buy them on consignment from you. Better World Books, maybe you've seen them if you've bought used books from Amazon. They will give you a portion of the proceeds once they have sold those books. The problem with those types of organizations is that it can be expensive, but also it can be very time consuming. Maybe it will be beneficial to your school, your budget. Maybe it's something that you would like to participate in. But here are some other organizations, and then here is the wait, don't get rid of that. This is the manual that the Wyoming State Library has available if you're interested in donating to state institutions. And let me turn this pointer off. This is my information, and again, the recording and the link to these slides will be available at wyominglibraries.org.